Hello and welcome to our critical Let's Play video. For our project, we are covering the game Cuphead that was released in 2017. The story is about the brothers Cuphead and Mugman losing a bet to the devil after they gambled their souls away. In order to free themselves, you are challenged to beat all of the boss levels in the game and collect all of the soul contracts that is scattered across the Isles of Inkwell. This vintage run and gun style of game is similar to an old-fashioned 2D side-scrolling platformer that is very difficult to play and combines the hectic platforming gameplay with chaotic bullet dodging mechanics to create insane stages that will have players try time and time again to complete. For our critical Let's Play, we wanted to talk about why people play rage games like Cuphead and how it fits in that genre. But first, let's delve into the history and the development of the game itself.
Cuphead was initially revealed by Canadian indie game development studio Studio MDHR in 2014. However, actual game development went as far back as 2010. During the first demo, Cuphead was actually a much smaller game, and really only had 8 or so bosses that would be fought in a style similar to Mega Man. However, due to the popularity it received, they quickly readjusted their vision to include more bosses, an overworld hub level system, and implemented platforming. By 2015, the original 3-person team had expanded to about 19 people. Since then, Cuphead is known primarily for 2 things, its difficulty and its art design. The entire game looks like it was ripped straight out of a 1930s era cartoon, down to the rubber hose style animation that the developers were inspired by. Even from the main menu, you can immediately see the film grain effect that lasts throughout the entire game. And so in order for a game to look exactly like a 1930s cartoon, it was made exactly like a 1930s cartoon. Only 5 artists from the studio worked on Cuphead, and they were all responsible for everything ranging from concept art to each animation. Literally every frame in this game was hand-drawn, and every background was watercolor painted. The only thing that differed from the old school process was that everything in Cuphead was colored digitally, since after testing both hand coloring and digital coloration, they found that there wasn't much difference. Going past the visual design, playing Cuphead is a different experience in itself. The game doesn't introduce any mechanics that are new or groundbreaking necessarily, but I felt like everything it did implement was smooth and refined. The jump timing felt just right, which really mattered from the get-go, as learning to parry and dodge are essential to the game. The gun aspect of the run and gun genre was simple too, just hold down the keybind to shoot your weapon. However, the variation Cuphead provides really mixes up the game and allows for strategy and individual player loadouts. As you can see here, both of us are running different setups as we're running through this boss level. The player using Cuphead is utilizing the chaser gun, which allows for him to not need to aim at the cost of lower damage. The player using Mugman, on the other hand, is utilizing the charge gun, which allows for extra damage at the cost of having to be precise. There is no guaranteed way of beating the game, and there is no definitive loadout that is an end-all be-all to every level. And of course, how could we forget to talk about the second half of Cuphead, which is the difficulty. Many games these days have a variety of difficulties that aim to cater to as many people as possible. These can range from easy, normal, hard, legendary, nightmare, etc., depending on the game. Cuphead here only has 2 difficulties, simple or regular. While it could be argued that the limited difficulty levels could make potential players lose interest, I personally think that the developers made it so that players could have the gameplay experience that they meant for Cuphead to give. And look, despite what others may say, Cuphead is not an easy game. In either solo or co-op, you need good reflexes and the ability to memorize boss mechanics. The game allows for some mistakes, but not many. Co-op play lets you revive your teammate depending on how well the surviving player can time jumps, and if the dying player died in a fortunate spot. After playing both solo and co-op, my conclusion is that the game is definitely more enjoyable with a partner rather than without. It can relieve a lot of the frustration that comes from playing the game solo. Now this brings us to the argument of why we think Cuphead qualifies as a rage game. As referenced by the video done by Snowman Gaming, there are a few key components as to what makes a rage game. The first is that the challenge presented has to seem fair. While I certainly died a lot in Cuphead, at no point did I feel like I was cheated out of a victory because of lazy game mechanics or poor level design. The second component is that the player needs to have full control over the character. This is for several reasons, but the main one is that the player feels the full responsibility for their actions, whether they succeed or fail. This is why many rage games are platformers, since giving players full motion control is one of the most effective ways of carrying over this feeling. A game that takes this to even greater heights is QWOP, a game infamous for making the player control individual parts of a person's leg in order to make them run. The third component in rage games are fast respawns. In Cuphead, the respawn times are quick, and the game doesn't force you to back into the overworld to restart the level. There are no life tokens like in Mario that force you to keep track of how many times you can play, and so the time between your death and the restart at the beginning of the level is pretty short. The final aspect of rage games that Cuphead does a bit differently from other rage games is how it measures incremental progress. This is one of the key parts of rage games. It allows the player to make slow but steady progress. Cuphead takes itself seriously. When you die, you die. If there isn't someone there to revive you, it takes you all the way back to the beginning of the level or the fight. The way that they still allow a sense of incremental progress is the screen displayed at the very end of the level, the one that shows you how far you got, how many boss phases you fought through, and how much you have left. Watching yourself progress further and further every time can be addicting, and seeing how close you got before dying can be devastating. Combining all these together, I think it makes Cuphead the perfect rage game.
Now, I'll be talking about why people play rage games and the reason why they are very addicting to play. In the 1980s, a computer scientist named Seymour Papert once quoted a student describing their experience of learning Logo, the educational programming language that he co-created, as being, quote, "It's hard, it's fun, it's Logo." The concept of hard fun was expressed as giving someone something to learn, while it is fun and challenging at the same time. This was the same concept that was later adopted by many game developers to be implemented into the games we know today. If a game is too easy and continually holds the player's hand, it could disengage the player from embracing the game to its full potential. If the activity is too hard, people would usually give up or shy away from the challenge if not skilled enough. Some games were able to find a balance in easing the player's learning curve by introducing levels and tutorials and teaching the basic moves and controls. By mastering the gameplay mechanics and trying to finish the game by defeating each boss, psychologists call this as intrinsic motivation, or the urge to make progress towards a goal without the promise of an external reward. In other words, if you find yourself doing something regardless of whether it will be paid, acknowledged, or otherwise compensated for in exchange for doing it, you are intrinsically motivated. By playing a video game, there's no real-life reward that comes when finally beating it. You're only rewarded with the self-fulfillment and valuable experiences that you had when playing. In the end of each level, you're being graded by your performance and how well you were able to complete the objectives. Although it feels really good when you receive a good letter grade, it only acknowledges the player as a pat on the back of how well they did. Paul Schrader, a computer scientist who studies intrinsic motivation and hard fun in the psychology department at the University of Minnesota, says that fun has nothing to do with it. He quotes, "Our brains are designed to be very complex constraint satisfaction machines." He says, "We're goal-seeking, and having a goal means defining a constraint on an outcome. Achieving the goal involves releasing the goal, which is satisfying, but is a peculiar kind of non-hedonic kind of satisfaction." To Schrader, a person playing a game like Cuphead is motivated by the mastery of completing each level. If someone were to fail, the intrinsic motivation would be able to go back and try again, even if it means having to spend hours in completing one objective or dying many times until finally killing the boss. Although we talk about why people play rage games and why they are addicting to play, I want to discuss about rage quitting and why people stop playing games when they are too difficult. Rage quitting can be defined as the act of quitting a game when it is very frustrating to play. It can be the result of the player losing their rewards, making them feel like they made little to no progress, or just wasting their time. I've seen many posts online saying Cuphead being a game where many have rage quit. Don't get me wrong, Cuphead is a wonderful and aesthetically pleasing game. However, it is very infuriating to play. I probably died over 100 times in the first island because I wasn't able to react quickly enough to adapt to the enemy behaviors. But in every death, I learned a little more and more on how I was able to progress further into each level, and it required an incredible amount of patience. According to an online article about psychology in video games, this is known as productive failure. It quotes, "When we fail at something, this failure teaches us the limits of our knowledge and what we need to improve upon. This makes us more receptive to the knowledge that can help address this gap. This brings up the concept of losing is winning, saying that you don't really lose when you fail, but able to review your mistakes to try all over again. Therefore, I was able to improve my skills and progress through the story, and eventually winning each boss encounter. As people post online saying Cuphead is too difficult and make videos about rage quitting the game, I think that it gives pressure to developers in creating games that are too easy.
Last one. Stupid coin! Fucking shrimp! Fucking jelly bean! I'm gonna rip my fucking eyeballs out.
Let me tell you something. If you're not allowed to be a journalist, if you can't beat Cuphead, well then I better delete my channel. Because I ain't beating that game. I don't want to play it. I made it to World 2. That means it will be the end of the game because I ain't playing that game for another second. The game is too hard and you know it. Fuck!
To bring back the point about the concept of hard fun that was early mentioned in the video, I think that it creates a more satisfactory victory of completion than being able to binge play the entire game in one sitting. Yes, it can be very difficult or frustrating to play, or even it takes hours just to beat one boss, but it just makes the experience more worth it once you actually manage to finish it. Over the years, there are many great titles that are infamously known to be brutally difficult, such as Super Meat Boy, Dark Souls, Castlevania, or even Flappy Bird, and many more that are remembered as classics that among gamers are pinnacle tests of achievement. Just finishing Cuphead is a mountaintop of an accomplishment that very few players can respect the grit and grind that you had to go through in finishing the game. Imagine telling someone how you were able to reach a goal, even how difficult or impossible the journey may have looked, or being able to persevere through many death screens without quitting. You will be rewarded with their utmost respect and awe that a few gamers were able to earn with such feats. I think that Cuphead is a great example that can leave players with very memorable and valuable experiences that many major title games today can't achieve.